because I was thinking about this one verse, for where your treasure is, there is your heart also. And I was searching to find out where my heart was this week. It was just in a funk. And I was in it yesterday, and I usually have my sermon written on Friday, and then I work on it Saturday, and then Sunday morning sometimes I tweak it a little bit. But I couldn't, it wasn't coming out, and that was making it a little bit weirder. So last night I had a dream, and I know these twins, and I think there's a few of you that know them. Miss Beckton, I know these young girls that I've known. I think they're 17 now. They're beautiful young ladies. They're twins. And I've known them since they were about 12. When I was working at St. Mark's Youth Group, Palm Beach Gardens, they were kind of the little girls that, one of them always talked, and they were always into stuff. And they weren't my favorites at that point. Let's just put it that way. But they've grown up to be beautiful young ladies, and they've come over here and helped a lot. And they helped paint a couple weeks ago, and they do a lot of things for different groups of people. They're very generous with their time, as is their grandma. And anyhow, in this dream, they came to the parish, and they said, "Do you want to go for a bike ride?" And those of you who know me a little bit, I like to bike ride for recreation, but also kind of to get away. And it just kind of excited me. Oh, well, these girls took time out of their lives to come ask me to go for a bike ride. And they said, "Well, let's go to Stewart." And I'm thinking, that's a little farther than I usually go. Even in my dream, I was trying to think through it. And then it started raining, even in my dream. It was probably raining outside, and it got into the dream. And then I said, well, let's just make plans for another time. And we'll leave from like Palm Beach Gardens. It'll be a little closer. And maybe we'll work our way to Jupiter, maybe not Stewart. But anyhow, I think what made me happy and thankful and kind of assured was that these young ladies took time out of their lives to ask me just to go on a bike ride. It was the invitation that was really what excited me and what kind of made me really happy. And I woke up in a much better mood, and then I was able to just sit down and write out a sermon. And then all the words of our readings today then jumped out at me. So what I'm trying to tell you is sometimes, people go, well, you're a priest, everything's wonderful. It ain't so. People are people, and people get in funks. But what finally came to me this morning were all the things I'm going to tell you. And it's like sometimes it just jumps out. The first reading today in Genesis talks about Abram and his vision. And it could have been a dream. And the first words out of God's mouth is, "Don't be afraid, Abram. Don't be afraid. I'm your shield." And this is before Abram has agreed to do what God is asking him to do. So his name's still Abram. Once he agrees, he takes on the new name of Abraham. And we all know that he then becomes the father of nations. So God gives him this great vision. You're going to be the father of the nation. And Abram, what I love about, especially in the Old Testament, is the prophets talk back to God. And Abram says, well, how can I be the father of nations if I don't even have a child? I don't even have an heir. How's it possible? And my wife is barren, and I'm old. And we know the story goes on, and Sarah has a child. And that broadens this whole thing that becomes the descendants of Abram. But God then pushes back to Abram and says, not only will you have an heir, but your descendants are going to be like the stars in the sky. And I think for all of us who live in the city, when we look up in the sky at night, we don't do it too often. We see some stars because city lights kind of keep it bright. But I know a lot of you have been out to the country or out camping or wherever, and you've gotten away from those lights. And remember, imagine what they look like when you get away from city lights. It's the sky is just lit up, and you can just see thousands and millions of stars. So that's what Abram looked up at, and at some point, then he takes God's invitation and said, "Yes, I'll go do what you said." And then we go to Psalm 33. And the first words that we read today, Miss Vera read today, were happy is the nation whose God is the Lord. Happy the people he has chosen to be his own. This is all about happiness, faith, and assurance. And it ends, our soul waits for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. Again, that word shield, the same one that God said to Abram. In other words, God made the promise to Abram, and he's also making the same promise in the psalm. I am your shield. Let your loving kindness, O Lord, be upon us as we have put our trust in you. And I think in this context, we can substitute the word trust for faith. So today's readings, what I'm seeing, what has jumped out at me, is that faith and assurance is what God is offering to us. And in the gospel, that same theme of faith and assurance is the first words out of Jesus' mouth to his disciples. Again, do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's pleasure to give you the kingdom. And what does he mean by that? It's the same assurance that with faith, there's this whole kingdom available to you. And it's both in this world and in the next. And we see the same parallel of God promising Abraham many descendants, with Jesus promising his disciples to give them the kingdom, the pleasure of the kingdom, he says. Jesus then focuses his disciples on building the treasure that won't wear out. So don't use purses that will wear out. Focus on those things that are good. Focus on faith. Focus on hope. Focus on love. Focus on family. Focus on other folks. That's how you build this kingdom that he's talking about. And finally, Paul, the great theologian, synthesizes it all. He says, faith is the assurance of all things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And I love that line because that's boiled down as gotta have faith. That even when you're in the funk or you're in a bad situation, you have to have that faith that you'll get out of it and that you'll move on. And we know that change is hard. It's hard for all of us. But we also, if we have that assurance that faith will pull us through, then we have something to look forward to. Because by faith, Paul goes on to say, by faith Abraham obeyed, and he was called to set out to a place he was to receive as an inheritance. And he set out not knowing where he was going. Doesn't that sound like a lot of us? We don't know where we're going. How many people are from Riviera Beach that's sitting here today? Okay, that means all the other one of you are from some other hometown, right? I'm from Riviera Beach, but I moved on and now I'm back. I didn't know what God was going to do in my life. God's taken me on a lot of travels. And I'm sure you feel the same way. If you look back over the timeline, where did you come from? What hometown did you leave? What family did you leave to come here? What friends did you leave behind to come here? Has God been in that journey with you? Do you see that God was in that journey? We read these readings about Abram and Jesus and disciples and Psalms, and really, God's still talking to us. He's saying to us, I am your shield. Right? Jesus saying there's a reward at the end. Jesus says that God is giving you the pleasure of his kingdom. If we believe that, sometimes it's hard to believe that, but if we believe that, then we're true Christians. And then the times that we're in the funk and we're not really believing that, when we're having a hard time with whatever's going on in our lives or in our brains or in our families or with friends, or we're fighting with friends or whatever it is, or we're fighting with God, then we have to go back to the idea that Paul says. That, you still have to have faith because you look back on your life and you've seen that God has been with you. God was your shield. God was with you during the bad times as well as the good times. And Jesus speaks to each one of us today, and he says the same words that he said to his disciples. Do not be afraid, for it is your Father's pleasure to give you the kingdom. And Jesus gives us some examples of good servants. It says in here slaves, but I think we can use servants. Good servants will always be ready for God. They'll have their lamps lit. They'll be ready to go when the master comes. And it's the same with us. Jesus is offering us that same invitation about the kingdom. He's offering it just like he offered it to the disciples 2,000 years ago. So today I pray that we each kind of open up that invitation that God has always given to us. That we have that faith that kind of gets us over those humps of life that have it, when we're in that low place, that we can move on. And for those of you who go, I never felt that faith, then I think the thing to do is pray for the faith. Very simply, dear Lord, I want what you're offering to me. I want you to be in my life. I want to try you. I've tried everything else, but I want to try your way. And we have to do that a lot of times over our lives. It's not just one time. It happened to me last week. It'll happen to me in a month, So, but always have kind of that small flame in you that says, I'll get through this. God will help me get through this. It's not all about me and what I want. It's about what God wants in my life. Just like what God wanted in Abram's life and what God wanted for the disciples. It's the same thing happening today at St. George's in Riviera Beach that happened 2,000 years ago in some field when Jesus was talking to his disciples. So I found it together. And I want you to keep this, and for those days when you're in the funk or you're in the low country, maybe this will help. Dear Lord,
I thank you for this day. I thank you for my being able to see and to hear this morning. I'm blessed because you are a forgiving God and an understanding God. You have done so much for me, and you keep on blessing me. Forgive me this day for everything I have done, said or thought that was not pleasing to you. I ask you for forgiveness. Please keep me safe from all danger and harm. Help me to start this day with a new attitude and plenty of gratitude. Let me make the best of each and every day to clear my mind so that I can hear from you. Please broaden my mind so that I can accept all things. Let me not wander and whimper over things I have no control over. And give me the best response when I push beyond my limits. I know that when I can't pray, you listen to my heart. Continue to use me to do your will. Continue to bless me, and I may be a blessing to others.